I'll say this. Tarek Skubal is our savior. Or at least he sure as hell was over the weekend as the Tigers were able to salvage one in a 4-game set at home against the Cleveland Guardians. Going to talk all about that. I was at the park for the last 2 games of that series. Really looking forward to talking about, well, at least one of those games. Also, yes, you could probably tell I was at the park because very tan. Probably even a little bit sunburned. Yes, even the beautiful natural olive complexion of yours truly does get a little bit sunburned every so often. So this is going to be a Tigers-heavy show. I honestly don't think there's been a whole lot of other news that's broken regarding Detroit or Michigan sports. I talked about the Michigan sign stealing stuff a little bit last week. We're still kind of waiting for stuff to break with that. So this will primarily be Tigers. Which obviously I'm happy to do. It's my bread and butter. But before we jump into that, just want to throw a few things out there. At Castellani 2014 on Twitter, CastellaniContent.com. You'll find all of our content. It's updated every single day. If you like this podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify. We are on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And guess what? I was just at the Lone Goat last Saturday to check the place out. Got a beautiful upstairs room for the June 6th watch party against the Chicago Cubs. Come on by, everybody. That should be a lot of fun. Okay. Record time. I'm getting better at that. So let's talk about it. Now, the Tigers did play multiple series this week. They did win 2 out of 3 in St. Louis after getting blown out in the first game. Won a close game in the second game of the series and then had a marvelous bullpen day. It's so weird how that works. The bullpen had been kind of maligned for a few weeks, and then they come in, they have a bullpen day in which they're essentially flawless. But the big series of the week, and I would argue in a lot of ways the biggest series of the year up to this point, despite the fact this team has played some real contenders. I mean, they won 2 out of 3 against the Yankees, they won 2 out of 3 against the Padres, but divisional opponent, you play 3 out of 3 games against Cleveland, 4 games, against Cleveland, and you lose 3. And the one that you won, we will talk about because I stand by it. It's been a few hours now since I said that. I think it's the best pitching performance I've ever seen, at least live, but we'll discuss that. But I did also say, regardless of what happened on Sunday, this series would be viewed as a disappointment, and it would be hypocritical for me to fall back on that now. Tigers dropped 3 games at home to the Cleveland Guardians. Now, Twins lost Sunday as well. It is a 4-game divisional lead. The sky is not falling down. The world is not ending. This is, as of the time of this recording, one of the best teams in baseball. And I'm going to keep driving that point home because the playoffs are the playoffs, and there is a randomness to it, and you do hope to get a team on the right day. But the 162-game sample size in baseball, it's the biggest sample size that there is of any regular season. More often than not, regardless of what you do against a team head-to-head, regardless of how you break it down by month, against division, what have you, over 162, cream rises to the top. Yeah. And Tigers took it on the chin this weekend. There's no doubt about it. They dropped 3 out of 4 against the Cleveland Guardians. Really, the bats went quiet until the 4th inning of Game 4. They didn't hit with guys in scoring position really the entire time. It was ugly. So here's what I'm going to start off with as a positive. Okay. And it's something that I just want to throw out there to Tiger fans because I feel like it's the inverse of where I was at when I started doing content for this team. I've made this point before, but I just want to really drive it home. Reacting to one game or even one series in Major League Baseball, you can't react to it the way that you react to one game in the NFL. It's completely different. There are teams that have been overwhelmingly dominant teams in the regular season that had shitty weeks, hell, probably even bad months, right? I mean, where they just didn't play particularly good baseball. You know what I mean? Last year, Houston was like 12 games under 500. They end up winning the division. You know, weird things happen. I still think Detroit, by the end of 162, there's a lot that can change. You know, they're going to get Bieber back at some point. Maybe we make a move at the deadline. I think this is Detroit's division to lose. Because guess what? They're going to get Parker back. They're going to get Wenzel back. We already got Matty V back this series. He had a nice swing in the 3rd game on Saturday to drive in, too. Like, these were all, these are important things to point out. We've been without Reese Olson as well, who is pretty dominant prior to going on the injured list, right? But these games do matter a little bit more. They just do. And maybe you can say that's the fan in me talking, but I am a fan, and the fact is this is a team that has destroyed you over the last decade. I mean, part of it was that the Tigers rebuild coincided with like their best years. Like Cleveland 2016 to 2020 when they had Lindor, that was like when the Tigers were in the pit. Now they haven't really been bad ever since. They had a few like whatever years, but in the ALCS a year ago, had a really good team in 2022 as well. This is the team, when I think of ball clubs that have clubbed the Tigers more than any over the last decade, this is always the one that comes to mind. And of course, you took them to 5 last year in the postseason, and they beat you in the deciding game of a playoff series. So it matters a little bit more. I understand from a fan standpoint. It's why I'm not trying to talk down to anybody. I understand why the microscope's going to be held up a little bit closer. How do we match up with this team in our division that, at least as of the time of this recording, is going to be chasing us for the remainder of the regular season? And I pointed out multiple times in the postgame videos, but I want to discuss it more here. Cleveland is a team that just kind of has Detroit's number. And when I say that, I think what people run to is that it's some sort of discrepancy in talent. I don't think that's the case. Or that, as people put it so eloquently on Tigers Twitter, it's Cleveland voodoo magic. Let's discuss that, okay? The metrics show that Cleveland is, by definition, a contact team. What that means, right, because I think sometimes people get it wrong, is that they are a team that thrives on making the pitcher beat you, not getting themselves out, but also the trade-off here, not hitting for a ton of pop, not hitting for a ton of power. That's why, and Castellani was great on Friday, but it's why I wasn't crazy about the Josh Naylor trade, just because I felt like that was, along with J-Ram, some actual thump that they had in that lineup. I think that when you look at what Chris Fetter-led coaching staffs, or pitching staffs, are predicated on, it is the idea of attacking the zone. It is the idea of throwing strikes. And whether you're striking guys out or not, what they want is you getting ahead. It opens things up when you can win the race to 2 strikes. And you have an offense in Cleveland that ambushes you. In a lot of ways, that's kind of like matter and antimatter colliding. I mean, something's got to give. I just think from a pitching standpoint, it's not a great matchup for Detroit when they go up against this lineup. I'm not going to say they're this good, but they are comparable in a lot of ways to what the Royals were in the mid-2010s, where you looked at that lineup. There was not a 40 home run guy there, but every guy put the ball in play. There wasn't a lot of strikeouts. They ran the bases really well. They played very efficient baseball, and Cleveland has consistently done that against Detroit as well. I think in the game after, or in the second game, the Friday game, I made a point how like the narrative is starting to form of, this team doesn't win the division until they knock off Cleveland. And I think in a lot of ways that's true. I mean, we just do that in sports when it comes to rivalries. But I want to drive home the point that, like, Cleveland, Detroit's not going into these games scared. I think I don't believe there's any sort of mental block necessarily. I think that stuff more so exists in college, if it exists at all. I think more, quite frankly, I think that's kind of stuff that like people like me like to talk about. I don't think these players go into games saying, "Oh God, it's Cleveland coming." That's not how these guys roll in any walk of life. These are professionals. They try to go about their business every day and get better every day and win every day. So I don't think that's the case. I just think from a matchup standpoint, it's not great. The other big thing, because I think the contact stuff and the way they run the bases, all that stuff is, that stands out. That's a sign of a good team. They have their identity as a team. That goes back to Vogt. That goes back to Francona. They've kind of had this, scrappy ball club for a while. Now, in the past, they had tremendous starting pitching. They turned the clock back in this series because Bybee and Sassoni looked like Kluber and Carrasco back in 2015 or 2016. I mean, these guys were just absolutely dealing. But in general, it's a team that likes to shorten games with their pen. But I've tried to point out what is the biggest difference, because when we watch these teams play more often than not, I feel like Cleveland has the upper hand. And people can point to the bullpen, and yes, Cade Smith, Emmanuel Clase, though he's had his struggles, those guys are hammers on the back end of the pen. Detroit has some really good weapons. They don't have anybody whose stuff is as ridiculous as Cade Smith. But I think what it comes down to is that when these teams play, Cleveland stars play like stars. And I don't necessarily know if I can say that about Detroit. When you think of Cleveland's best players right now, who are the two that come to mind? Steven Kwan and Jose Ramirez. Those two don't just come to mind because they're good players against everybody. I mean, those are two all-star players. Jose Ramirez is one of the best third basemen of his age. He's going to end up being in the Hall of Fame, right? But those guys not only perform well as players, they beat the hell out of Detroit Tiger pitching. It's been that way yesterday on a day where Skubal was untouchable, still gave up a hit to Jose Ramirez, right? Now, Kwan didn't play the Sunday game. I think they would have won anyway with Skubal pitching, but that definitely helped, right? You could throw Carlos Santana in there, who's, old enough to be Pope at this point and is still working counts 3-1, 3-2. Still drawing walks, still hitting homers, right? And when I look on the other side of things, what Cleveland fans always point out to me on Twitter is how you feel about J-Ram is how we felt about Miguel Cabrera for, 10 years there when he was really rolling. You never wanted him to step to the plate. And while obviously Miggy faded, I do remember in the early 2010s, early to mid 2010s, the last person you wanted to see if you were a Cleveland Indian fan at the time was Cabrera. When we play Cleveland, the guys who I need or should be the guys who rise up and start clubbing the ball and collect high leverage hits and drive in guys when there's runners with scoring position and hit home runs. There's three in this core, this young core of homegrown guys that come to mind. Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson, and Colt Keith. None of those guys were great in this series. Okay? And I would say in general, I would have to go back and look at the numbers, but in high leverage especially, none of them have ever been particularly great against Cleveland. In fact, in the playoffs last year, I think Torkelson was like 0 for 15 to start that series. He didn't get a hit he got a hit in game 3. But you get my point, right? Like they were getting kind of shut down. Green didn't do a whole lot. Your best hitter in this series was Glaber, who has been a wonderful addition. He reached base 8 consecutive plate appearances in this series. I don't care who you're facing. That is really darn impressive. He's been fantastic. But I think if you're looking for the singular moment that speaks to what Detroit is able to do or not able to do in these series against Cleveland compared to what Cleveland's able to do, as weird as it sounds, there was a brief moment at the end of the game on Saturday where it felt like Detroit had a pulse again. The aforementioned Gleyber Torres, hits a double, scores 2 runs. All of a sudden, you have Glaber, I believe, on second or third. I think second. He ended up going to third on a defensive indifference. But on second, and the tying run is at the plate with 1 out, with Colt Keith and Riley Green due up against a righty in Clase. Now, I understand Clase is nasty, but, okay, just trying to play devil's advocate here. Colt Keith loves those cutters, and he crushes pitches on the inside part of the plate. Maybe he gets something from Clase, grind out in that bat. Clase had just hit a guy a few batters before. These are when you make your bones. This is when, it sounds corny as shit to say this, but this is kind of where legends are made. Because when it comes to baseball, and I'm going to talk about this with Javi Baez a little bit in a minute, it's a lot more about moments than it is about numbers. There's certain guys in this league whose numbers are totally adequate, and yet they scare the hell out of me anytime they come to the plate against the Tigers because they just kill us, and they're clutch. They collect big hit after big hit. I talked about it with Torkelson a million times. I didn't even realize this. When you look at Torkelson's numbers a year ago, they were bad, and it was a massive step back compared to where it was in 2023. But I'll be honest, I thought he was numbers-wise on par with where Javi was. And Javi was the worst offensive player in baseball a year ago. The issue is whenever Torque got hits, they were in situations that generally didn't matter. Now, this year, it's been the inverse of that, and that's been great. But you get my point. It's that this is a game. It's a team game, but you still have your stars. And teams with stars win. And they often win because those stars play like stars in big moments. Look at the World Series last year. Freddie Freeman was out of this world, right? Teoscar had some big hits, right? And on the other side, you had Aaron Judge, who was really struggling until Game 5, and Giancarlo hit the homer in Game 1. But you get my point. If you can find a way to neutralize a team's stars, you can win these games in the division. And I really think this series over the weekend was a really interesting test for Detroit because I think that Cleveland is a team that is – I don't think they do this on purpose, but that is equipped in many ways to beat Detroit. Detroit's not a great defensive team. Cleveland puts the ball in play. Detroit throws a lot of strikes on the mound. Cleveland, makes contact. It's a tough hurdle for them to get over. I do think and hope that Sunday's game, brought them back from the dead a little bit. But we also need to contextualize where this team is at. And it's so funny because I think on almost every show that I've had over the last few weeks, I've come on here and said, hey, this team's playing a 110 win pace. They're not going to win 110 games. And then when they have their rough patch, everyone acts like it's the end of the world when I'm on here saying, I've been saying this for weeks. They're going to hit some sort of wall. And that's not me saying, hitting a wall does not mean that you lose 25 out of the next 30. It just means there's probably going to be a 4 or 5 game losing streak at some point where you get swept by somebody you shouldn't get swept by. All right. Now, they avoided the sweep in this particular instance, but I do think I'm very guilty of this. I'm very guilty of this in baseball. We compare the head-to-head so much when in reality, I mean, it's the Thanos, all that for a drop of blood line. You won 3 out of 4 in Comerica, and it's still a 4-game divisional lead on Memorial Day, which, as I've said in the past, is kind of a big checkpoint for the season. Of course, they should have played better against Cleveland. And of course, I'm concerned about the fact that I think in the last month of the season, we have a home series against Cleveland. And I think the second to last series of the year is a road series at Cleveland. Like I'm not here blustering, acting like the division is over. I'm still very concerned about this team, but I do think we have to put into perspective where they're at. And the fact that, look, they haven't had an off day in forever, seemed a bit gassed at points. I don't want to come on here and carry water or make excuses. Okay, we saw what we saw. It was not a great series. It was a disappointing series. The offense took steps back. The pitching had its moments, obviously in that last game especially, but and high leverage often struggled, points. Brebbia comes in extra innings and gets throttled there. So there's some concerns for sure. And I think the deeper we get into this season, the more concerns those the more legitimate, I can't talk today, the more legitimate those concerns become. But for the time being, I see a team with a 4-game lead in the Central, and I'll take it. And I'm not going to be saying that all year. Okay, if this team has a 4-game lead with a month left and they blow it, I'm not going to come on here and say, oh, shucks. Like, expectations change throughout the season. I still think, even with the disappointing series that was against Cleveland, there's still a lot of good going on. They're still in a pretty darn good place, even with the injuries and everything. And guess what? The thing about injured players, they often heal. So they're going to get those guys back. The last game of this series, I can't believe I've waited this long to talk about it. Tarek Skubal pitched. I was there on Sunday. In my mind, maybe the greatest pitching performance I've ever seen. And I know that there's going to be people that are going to say that I'm nuts. First off, if you missed it, the first career complete game for Tarek Skubal, the first career complete game, shutout. 9 innings, 2 hits, no runs, no walks, 13 strikeouts on 94 pitches. His final pitch of the day was 102.6 miles per hour. You round up, that's 103. That is the fastest pitch ever thrown by a starter in the 9th inning. You know who held it before? You would have guessed it. Justin Verlander, right? Threw 101 in a game in 2009. Just a ridiculous outing. And watching it live, it was, they say it's like watching Picasso paint. I mean, and that lineup can be so scrappy. And you had a good feeling early on because when people hit Skubal, they hit Skubal by ambushing him. You win the race to 2 strikes, he's killing you. All right. They were trying to get to him a little bit early, and they had some deep flyouts, and then he settled in. That's some of the greatest stuff I've ever seen. It is some of the greatest stuff I've ever seen. And, people were really talking. I mean, maybe it's because it was the first game. It was the Roku game, what have you. But it was the only game on for a time, and people were paying attention to this. I mean, this was an absolute masterpiece. And when I say these hyperbolic things like best pitching performance ever, I'm not saying necessarily in the history of Major League Baseball, right? I mean, I think there's performances that have been maybe a little bit more dominant, a little bit more clutch. But to me, I look at the final line, and he was perfect through 5, I believe. And yeah, we were all thinking, like, dude, he could actually do this today. Second time this year, I felt that. I felt that way against Texas, too, in the start where he had the 32 swings and misses. I mean, he was just that good. But giving up 2 hits, 1 extra base hit, and 1, single that J-Ram ripped, that is so much more impressive to me when you look at his stuff compared to guys who've thrown no-hitters and walked 6. Like, I get it, not technically a no-hitter, but you're going to tell me that Edwin Jackson's 8-walk no-hitter, ironically managed by A.J. Hinch, was more impressive than what Skubal did yesterday? I mean, just in regards to stuff to be that economical, that efficient, still miss that many bats, and by the way, have stuff that is getting more and more explosive as the game goes on. Guys, the final pitch is 103. I mean, I think I could probably, this entire segment could just be that and be like, all right, sure. The Tigers don't have a reliever ever who threw 103. You got a couple hundreds. Maybe Bruce Rondon before he blew his arm out and got fat. Like, there's, nobody else is featuring the kind of stuff that he was featuring. And it was a performance that they needed. Obviously, Pitching staff was a little banged up over the previous few days. Mize was only able to go 5 in his first start back. You're reeling, having lost 3 games in a row. You needed that showstopper performance, and he gave him so much more than that. To watch it was to feel privileged. And it's just another notch on the belt for a guy who is the best pitcher in baseball and a guy whose legend continues to grow. And I put the tweet out there just kind of comparing, because one thing that people have asked me is like, hey man, who's better, Skubal at his peak or Verlander at his peak? And I've always said, look, man, it's no comparison, because Verlander was just an innings eating machine. I mean, he was finishing like a lot of games. I think he had 6 complete games in 2011 alone. Skubal's thrown 1 his whole career. But when you look at the body of work, we are starting to reach that point where, in terms of run prevention, Skubal is, every bit as good. And as far as just being overwhelming with your stuff, in some ways, Skubal is better. Now, I will acknowledge, prior to Houston Verlander, the 10-plus strikeout per 9 guy wasn't necessarily a thing. It was more about being, economical and throwing strikes and trying to, finish games, right? But I put up the tweet out there. Verlander in his MVP season, which is 2011, he pitched 251 innings. Tarek, in I think 40-something starts now since the beginning of the 2024 season, so this is a little bit silly, has pitched 260 and 2/3 innings. Their records are comparable. Verlander was 24-5, Skubal 23-6. Verlander's ERA 2.40, Skubal's 2.42. Tarek Skubal's WHIP 0.902. That's a little bit better than Verlander's. His strikeouts per 9 is better than Verlander's. His strikeout to walk ratio is better than Verlander's. It's so tough to compare eras in baseball, and saying that makes me feel very old, because, to me, Justin Verlander was my era. I guess now it's like the past era, so to speak, however you want to put it. But the fact is, at his peak, Justin Verlander was the best, most dominant pitcher in the world, and at his peak, Tarek Skubal is the exact same. Whether one is pitching 6 innings and the other is pitching 9 is kind of irrelevant to me. And when we talked to Bailey, when we talked to Foolish Baseball over the last Chris and Company episode, I mean, he made the point of like these guys that are in the 99th percentile and all these statistics for pitchers, like a lot of times they stay there. I mean, Zach Wheeler got better in his 30s. Some of these guys get better. Now, I don't think Skubal throws at 103 again. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But he's such a difficult pitcher to pick up. I mean, it goes so far beyond just the overwhelming stuff, I feel like. Because, tons of guys throw hard and everything, but it's that arm slot and that leg kick. He's able to hide the ball, and then before you know it, 101 is just coming at your face. Like, it's just, he is what happens when a pitcher with overwhelming stuff is put on an organization that employs smart people and a coaching staff that knows what they're doing. This is what you end up with. And when people talk about why you can't have enough pitching, that's why. Because the 9th round pick from Seattle University is far and away the best pitcher in baseball. And that's why you hoard these guys, because eventually you might hit on one. Because Skubals and Verlanders, these guys don't come along very often. I mean, if you're lucky, you might get one of these guys in a lifetime. We've had 2 in the last 20 years. And that's, I do have to give the organization credit for that. You can, maybe call it luck or whatever, but it is a joy to watch. And I'd be lying to you if in the back of my head the message wasn't, a little bit muddled about what the future has in store for Tarek. But the one thing I will say, and this is true now, and I think we probably couldn't have said this prior to last September, is we're not wasting anything. This is a team in win now mode with the best pitcher in baseball that is leading their division. They won a playoff series a year ago. This is not a Sandy Alcantara with the Marlins a few years ago, pitching 220-something innings and doing it for a 75-win team. There's something very tangible here, something very real, and Tarek is at the forefront of that. So an unbelievable performance that I think will be talked about for a long time. I really think it's up there with the Verlander no-hitters as far as just stuff being that good. It was a dazzling outing. One more bit of Tiger-related news, and it's both of the positive variety and the negative variety, and it's something I noticed on Saturday in the game that they lost to Cleveland. And it carried over on a Sunday, but this was the first time since the home opener that I'd been to the ballpark. So obviously a lot of things had kind of changed. And I noticed something. On Saturday, the Tigers were in a tie game in the bottom of the ninth. And AJ was playing the matchups. Cleveland put Heron in. He's a lefty, so obviously he was pinch hitting, several righties, brought in Jahan. And I believe the guy that he brought in with 2 outs in the ninth was Javier Baez. It's important to point out he struck out on 3 pitches. But you go to Javi there, and he gets an overwhelming like an ovation I would have expected if like the ghost of 2013 Miguel Cabrera came to the plate. Like people were going nuts. And at the time I sent out a tweet about it, and I was being all pissy because I was like, I was happy that I wasn't happy that they blew the lead, and I didn't feel good about the game in general, and I sure as hell didn't think that he was going to hit another walk-off home run. But I did think to myself, look, it was a high intensity game. It was a tie game. Maybe they're more so cheering the situation than they are the player. And then I was at the ballpark on Sunday, and they're announcing the lineups. No one's done anything yet. No one's hit a ball yet. No one's even thrown a pitch. They announce Javi batting 9th, and he gets, outside of Skubal and Riley Green, the biggest ovation of anyone who was announced. That includes AJ, the manager, all that stuff. Like he was, I would argue, and I'm not going to measure fucking decibel levels. It was up there with Riley Green's in terms of just like fanfare. And it really got me thinking, one, about just like, we have very short memories, don't we, as fans? And I'm guilty of that as well, but it's interesting because people say all the time, you just hate Javi Baez. You just hate Javi Baez. No, I don't. I don't hate any player. These guys play for my team. It is beneficial to everyone if these guys are successful. But he's my least favorite Tiger of all time. I have not enjoyed watching him in the slightest over the last 3 years. I don't root against him because he plays for my team, but he has been a headache machine, and that's not even really taking the contract into account. This guy could be a AAA player coming up and getting a cup of coffee. The lack of discipline, it has been maddening to me. I understand, and I remember him in Chicago, so I understand the appeal of a player like Javi Baez, but to me, like, that persona or that aura, as the kids like to say, that surrounded Javi and him being this kind of whimsical, magical player, I felt like was more a result of just pure athleticism than it was the ability to hone any sort of craft. It's gotten worse the more I've watched him. But fuck what I think, okay? I thought we were in agreement on this. I thought nobody liked Javi Baez. And now he's getting standing ovations. So you're welcome to do that. You pay tickets to go to the park. I'm not going to tell people how they should cheer, what to talk about. And my opinion matters no more or less than anybody else's, right? But my question for Detroit fans, Tiger fans especially, is, has Javi redeemed himself to you? Like, is that enough? Like, if Javi is this, if he is the number 9 hitting, center field playing, scrappy, like, I don't know if you can call a guy who's making $140 million an underdog, but like, this like kind of scrappy Detroit comeback story, is he redeemed to you? Because quite frankly, there's nothing outside of like winning an MVP. There is nothing he could do to redeem himself for the first half of that contract. I can't, like, and people could say it's bitterness, but I know he got injured last year. I get it. Even if he gets injured when he does, if we would have gotten a average Javi Baez, we probably win the division last year. Like, and that's including the injuries, even with him being out the last 2 months. Like, that's how just terrible this guy has been. So to me, there's no redemption. I'm glad he's doing better the way that I want everyone on the team to be doing better. But I'm surprised because, and maybe this is a prime example of somebody who's way too chronically online, but I was under the belief more people shared my belief towards Javi, which is he's wholly detestable, but we're hoping that he can, do some good things. And look, the Red Sox game was incredible, and he's had moments this year. I do think, just kind of thinking out loud here, I think the move to center field softened a lot of people's opinion of him and the fact that he's actually good in center field. I think people have seen kind of a different version of him than we expected, because there was a time where I referred to him as kind of a selfish player. I no longer feel that way, and I did retract that on the show several weeks back. I do think his teammates like him. I didn't know if that was the case early on, but it's very clear. That's all true. And he still swings and misses like a motherfucker, and it's annoying. But I want him to do well. That's just the question I'm asking is, like, is this hobby good enough for you? And if that's the case, how are we looking at his standing here? And maybe I'm just taking too much out of it, but whatever. All right, yeah, that'll do it. Full Tiger Show, front to back. I like it. Castellani 2014 on Twitter, CastellaniContent.com. Lone Goat, June 6th. We will be back with a Chris and Company this week. We're interviewing Sparty, actually Sparties, not the candy, but that was Smarties. I fucked that up. I'm sorry. That was terrible. That was really terrible on my part. I'm not going to cut it just out of complete embarrassment. I deserve to have my face rubbed in elephant excrement, but Sparties, the mascot, two people who've been inside the Sparty costume at Michigan State, two former students. A bizarrely, and I've already recorded it, bizarrely more interesting interview than I expected, just in terms of the info and the data we got. Actually, some pretty interesting stuff. So I'd recommend you guys listen to that. And I appreciate, and I was at the park over the weekend, all the continued support you guys show me and you show Austin as we're, trying to get back to a good place, and we're working hard. And obviously having this wonderful baseball team with us is a great step. So thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.